For years, the British public has been shown a version of the royal family that looks composed, coordinated, and calm. Camilla and Catherine smile beside each other at state banquets, walk in step at Trooping the Colour, and appear side by side in official portraits. But behind that curated image, a different story has been circulating, one built not on official palace statements, but on the accounts of unnamed insiders speaking to tabloids. It's a story about tension, distance, and what some are calling an open warfare between the Queen Consort and the Princess of Wales. Before going further, it's worth saying plainly, none of this has been confirmed by Buckingham Palace, and the royal family has not addressed it publicly. What follows is a look at where these claims came from, what's actually verified, and what remains speculation. The rumors reportedly trace back to a state visit last year, when President Donald Trump and his wife Melania visited Britain. According to claims relayed by OK Magazine, royal watchers noticed what looked like Camilla gesturing for Kate to step away during a conversation with Melania Trump, a moment some interpreted as dismissive. Other observers who saw the same footage disputed that reading entirely, saying it was an ordinary bit of event choreography, nothing more. That's the nature of most royal feud stories. A few seconds of video, two competing interpretations, and a gap that anonymous sources rushed to fill. What isn't in dispute is that this has been a genuinely difficult stretch for the family, and difficult stretches tend to breed exactly this kind of speculation. In 2024, both King Charles and Catherine were diagnosed with cancer within months of each other, a fact confirmed directly by the family themselves, not leaked by insiders. Catherine's diagnosis was announced through her own recorded statement, and Charles's office confirmed his treatment shortly after. That period asked an enormous amount of every senior royal. Camilla and other family members had to step up publicly while two of the institution's central figures were receiving treatment, and William was balancing his father's illness, his wife's illness, and his own public duties simultaneously. It would be surprising if a year like that didn't leave some strain behind, whether or not it ever crystallized into anything resembling the feud tabloids describe. Laid on top of that has been the fallout from Prince Andrew. Andrew and his ex-wife, Sarah Ferguson, have been stripped of their remaining royal titles and are reportedly preparing to leave Royal Lodge, their longtime home on the Windsor estate. This is one of the only title-related upheavals actually happening in the family right now, and it involves Andrew, not Camilla. Sources cited by OK Magazine described this as an exhausting, drawn-out process for the whole family, Kate included, since she's reportedly been present for many of the internal conversations about how to handle it while continuing to support William. If there's a real source of fatigue and friction inside the palace this year, this is probably closer to it than any personal rivalry between Camilla and Kate. Meanwhile, Camilla's actual public record this year tells a fairly different story from the villain framing that tabloid headlines sometimes reach for. In early August, the journalist's charity announced a new honor connected to Camilla, continuing a tradition that stretches back over a century, tied to her long-standing patronage of the organization and her advocacy for literacy through the Queen's Reading Room, the charity she founded around the time of the COVID lockdowns. She's also spoken publicly about being the victim of an assault by a stranger on a train, sharing that experience in a conversation about abuse alongside John and Amy Hunt, whose relatives were killed in a crossbow attack in 2024. That's not the profile of someone hiding from scrutiny. It's someone continuing a fairly full public schedule, including appearances at Wimbledon, Royal Ascot, the Sandringham Flower Show, and Commonwealth events through the spring and summer. Catherine, for her part, has also kept a visible public presence following her recovery, attending the Nigerian state banquet at Windsor in a widely photographed tiara appearance, joining family Christmas traditions, and continuing her role alongside William as they take on more senior responsibilities. If there were a genuine, deep rupture between the two women serious enough to be called open warfare, it's the kind of thing that tends to eventually show up in behavior. Cancelled joint appearances, visible distance at events, absences from each other's engagements. So far, the public record doesn't show that. What it shows is two women continuing to appear at the same events, in the same family, doing the same kinds of public duties they've always done. None of this means the rumors are baseless invention. Royal reporters with genuine palace sources do sometimes surface real tension well before it becomes visible. The Sussex's departure was preceded by exactly this kind of insider reporting for months before anything became official. But there's an important difference between sources say there's tension and Camilla was stripped of her title and collapsed in a council chamber, which is the kind of claim that circulates on video platforms with dramatic thumbnails and countdown clocks, and which has no basis in anything Buckingham Palace, credible royal correspondence, or verified reporting has ever described. That version isn't a rumor with makey sourcing. It's fabricated outright, because no council exists with the power to strip Camilla's title in the way that story describes, and no such event has occurred. The honest version of this story is less cinematic, but arguably more interesting, because it says something true about how institutions like the monarchy actually function under strain. A family that has spent the last 2 years managing 2 cancer diagnoses, an aging monarch's reduced workload, the ongoing fallout from Andrew's disgrace, and constant global scrutiny is going to generate friction. Real, human, unremarkable friction, the kind that exists in every family under pressure. It doesn't need a fictional council order or collapse in a chamber to be compelling. The actual dynamic reported by insiders, quiet strain, unresolved tension after a viral moment at a state visit, and exhaustion from having to publicly project unity while privately managing a genuine crisis with Andrew, is a far more believable and human account of what's happening than any invented power struggle over ceremonial rank. It's also worth remembering how these stories are built. Outlets like OK! Magazine rely almost entirely on anonymous insiders and sources close to the family, phrases that carry the appearance of authority without any way for a reader to verify who actually said what. Buckingham Palace, by contrast, almost never comments on stories like these at all. Its policy is typically silence unless a claim becomes serious enough to require a formal denial. That silence gets read 2 ways. Some take it as tacit confirmation that something real is going on beneath the surface, others as the palace simply refusing to dignify speculation with a response, which has been its long-standing approach to tabloid rumor for decades. So where does that leave the actual relationship between Camilla and Catherine? Somewhere in the fog that surrounds most royal reporting, real people, dealing with real family strain, being watched by cameras that turn every gesture into a headline. The state visit moment with Melania Trump may have been exactly what it looked like to some observers, or exactly the nothing that others insist it was. The reported tension may reflect something genuine simmering beneath the family's public composure, or it may be an entirely ordinary amount of stress being narrativized into feud language because that sells better than family under pressure copes as well as most families do. What can be said with confidence is this: both women have continued appearing publicly, continuing their duties, and continuing to be photographed side by side at the events that matter most to the institution. Whatever private feelings exist between them, and every family carries some, the public record right now shows 2 women still standing where the crown needs them to stand. That's ultimately the more honest headline. Not a collapse, not a strip title, not a secret council order, but a royal family absorbing an unusually hard couple of years, with the ordinary friction that comes from that, filtered through a tabloid ecosystem that has every incentive to turn stressed into scandal. The real story of Camilla and Catherine in 2026 isn't a palace coup. It's 2 women who have had to grow into difficult, overlapping roles during one of the hardest stretches this family has faced in a generation, and who, so far, are still doing it together. This isn't the first time tabloids have built a rivalry narrative around 2 royal women, and it's worth understanding why the pattern repeats so reliably. The same structure was used for years with Kate and Meghan. Endless sources say pieces describing frostiness, jealousy, and clashing personalities, most of which were never confirmed on the record by anyone willing to be named. Some of those stories eventually turned out to have real substance behind them, as later interviews and biographies suggested genuine friction had existed. Others were almost entirely invented from a handful of ambiguous photographs and paparazzi angles. The lesson isn't that royal rift stories are always false. It's that the ratio of confirmed truth to speculation in this specific genre of reporting has historically been poor, which is exactly why a healthy amount of skepticism is warranted before treating any single tabloid account as settled fact. There's also a structural reason these stories cluster around Camilla in particular. Unlike Catherine, who has spent nearly 2 decades building a public image around caution, warmth, and careful neutrality, Camilla came into royal life as a genuinely controversial figure, blamed by large parts of the public for the breakdown of Charles and Diana's marriage, and required to spend years rebuilding trust before she was even granted the title of queen. That history means any ambiguous gesture involving Camilla gets read through a lens already primed to expect friction, in a way it wouldn't be for almost anyone else in the family. It doesn't make the Trump visit moment or the open warfare claims true. but it helps explain why stories about Camilla clashing with a younger, more popular royal woman find such a ready audience, regardless of how thin the actual sourcing behind them turns out to be.